Hello again, this is Kyle. Let's write some code. Today, mastering JavaScript callbacks. Callbacks are super important when working with asynchronous code in JavaScript, and you're going to run into asynchronous code a lot with JavaScript. And there are many alternative strategies to async callbacks, like promises, but today we're just going to be focusing on mastering callbacks, so let's ignore those for now. So quickly, what is a callback? In case you don't know. There are two types. So say if we have an array here and we're just looping through this array and there's each item on the array here. This is called synchronously, meaning when this is called right after, this will run before this code gets ran. It's ran synchronously. So yes, this is a callback, but it's ran synchronously. The other one is a asynchronous callback, so such as was set timeout. So now this will run 1 second later. So we'll say 1 second later. And if we do console log first, even though this is after our call to set timeout here, this is going to run first. And then, whoops. 1 second, there we go. This is going to be called 1 second after. So this is an asynchronous callback. And so it's very important, but both of them are callbacks. But so anyway, so let's focus today just on asynchronous callbacks because they're a little bit more tricky. Let's create an API here. And we're going to just be, first off, let's just use Node directly. So I'm going to use here the FS module from Node. And then we're going to create a function that gets a list of bears here. And so our API really, what we want to do is we want to supply a file path to bears and get those bears. And then we want to make sure that they really are bears because, let's check our list here. Some of these things might not be bears. I've never heard of a cheetah bear, but, we don't know unless we compare them to our dictionary here. So let's do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to create this API, this function called getBears, and it takes a file path and it takes a callback, and our callback is called done. So when we're all done, we'll be calling this. So we're just going to call fs read file. Now fs does have sync methods on here, and this will read the file synchronously, and you don't have to worry about all this. But any synchronous call is going to block the thread, and that's not good. So if you want to write some efficient code, it's better to use the async versions. That way we don't block the thread. So we're going to do that today because we're mastering callbacks. So anyways, we're going to pass in the file path, and then once this file is read, it's going to give us the contents of that file. And so here we could just say, okay, if we had an error, let's just return, let's just quit. Who cares at this point? This file doesn't exist or something. We're just going to call our done callback here with and supply the error as the first parameter, just to let the user know that you had an error. Do something with that. And so now if we're at this point, we assume, okay, everything's good. Let's keep going. So now what we're going to do is we're going to read our dictionary. And so we have this called bears dictionary here, this file right here. And so we're going to read that file next because we need it to compare with. And so again, we'll just call this error and dictionary, and then we'll say if there was an error, then we'll just stop right here and we'll call our done with that error and say maybe the dictionary's broken or who knows what's going on there. So now we're at this point and we're getting pretty nested here. And so we're at the point now where we want to compare the bears. And I don't really want to add any more nesting here because it's getting too unwieldy. So instead, I'm just going to call a function that I'm going to make up, and we'll say compare bears here. And so we'll give it our bears and then our dictionary. And then I'm going to jump over to the root scope of this bears function, this getBears function here, and I'm going to create this function right in there. And so what this is doing, and then we can specify bears dict. Okay, so what this is doing, it's creating a variable compare bears here on this scope of our getBears function, and that's hoisted up, and so that means it's available through the entire scope. Even though it's after here, it's still available here, so we can call this function here. And so now we don't have to worry about nesting too deeply, and we can then continue to write our function that compares the bears. So you may have noticed that I'm kind of a slow typer, so this part I'm just going to speed up because it's not very important and it's just comparing bears, nothing fancy. Okay, so now what we've done is we've just turned our list of bears and we split them to turn them into arrays here, and then we split the dictionary and the bears here. And then we're going over each item in that bears list and we're comparing it, saying, does it exist in the dictionary? And if it does, then we pass true, and then it lets that bear through. Otherwise, if it's false, then it rejects it. And so we now have a valid list of bears. And so here at this point, since we have what we want, we can call our done function. And since there was no error, we're not going to give, we're just going to pass in null to indicate that no, there was no errors, and then we'll just give our bears here. And so now finally the user can use our method here and say bears.text. They can give you a callback, an error, and bears, and we'll just console log out the bears here. And now we'll go to our code and we'll say node index.js to run it, and we get only an array here of valid bears. Yeah, so anytime you find yourself nesting callbacks too much, just drop a function down to the root scope there and do that. And I mean, you can go on and call other functions here. Maybe this one says do something else with the bears. You know, we can continue on down like this and return it here. So you know, I prefer to list the I mean, the function doesn't have to be here. It can be, you know, up here. It can be anywhere, but I prefer to have it organized in the order that they're called. So compare bears is called here, which is called here, and then do something else is called here and down here. So it goes down the list. So it's just a little easier to follow when you're reading it. Okay, but now what if you have a chunk of callbacks you need to know that are done? So I'm just going to clear out this file here, and I'm going to type npm start to start up our Budo server here that's just going to compile our code on demand for the browser. I'll put a link in the description to get this same setup going and a little bit more explanation about this. But anyways, it's just compiling our JavaScript and displaying it here in our browser. So now let's say we have a list of something. Maybe bears. Let's do that. Let's create a list of bears here. So we're going to say grizzly, polar, brown. Those are all good bears that I can remember. And now what we want to do is we want to load an image for each of these bears. So like typically you would say bears for each, supply the bear here, and then we'll say var image equals new image. And then we'll say image source equals the bear, and then plus the JPEG here. Now I have just bears already loaded up here. But so what we want to know is when all these bears have finished loading, we want a list of all these bears. And since they all load asynchronously, we're going to have to work with callbacks here. So first thing we're going to do is we'll say image on load. And this is known as a callback hook. So when the image has loaded, it will call this callback function here and let us know that it's loaded. But we want to only know when all of the images have finished and not just this one. And so since we might have more than one, we'll need to do some fanciness. So anyways, we're going to just create a variable up here at top called count. And this will just be the, not that. This will be the length of our bears array, so we know how many that we need to do. And so then again, we'll just drop a function down here, and we'll call this one next. And this will just let us know, do we need the next bear? Are we all done? So what we'll do is we'll just decrement count. So every time this function is called, it will say we've called one less time. So we just keep track of how many times we've loaded a bear. And so then from here we can say if the count is less than 1, from here we can say, okay, now we have all the bears. So we can say bears here. So now what we need to do is, instead of for eaching here, we just say map bears equals bears map. So what this is going to do is instead, it's going to loop through our bears array and change all of them into images. And then on each time it loads, we're going to call this next function here. And so now what we can do is it will loop through each of these bears, it will start loading the images, and they all load asynchronously, and the order is not guaranteed. One might load faster than the other depending on the file size. And we now get this list of bears here mapped up. So we keep counting, and we can see here, we can console log out our count. And so we count, okay, we loaded the first one, loaded the second one, we loaded the third one. Okay, we got all of them. And so now we here have an array of our fully loaded bears. Now, maybe you're curious to see what these bears look like. So let's just, now that we have this full list of bears, we can loop through them here. This will say bear, and we'll say document, body, append, child, bear. And since these are image elements, we can save that. And there we go. And so at this point, we have all the images fully loaded, so we can even do things we like, we know the bear width. And so as you can see, we can get the actual widths of the images, where before they're loaded, you cannot. Okay, moving on. So this loads all our bears, but the order is not guaranteed. It's not going to load grizzly first, then polar, then brown. It can load them in any order that we want. So instead, we want to load them in a specific order. So I'm going to just create a variable here to contain our bear images. And then I'm going to create a function called load bears. And then this function is just going to let us call it recursively as we load each bear. So what we want to do is, the first time it's called, we'll say bears shift. And so shift just pulls the first item off the array here. Now, we can then create an image here, say new image, and then say image on load, and we'll give it that callback hook. And so once this bear image has finished loading, we want to load the next bear. So what we're going to do is we're just going to call load bears again. So we can use this variable name here to call this function again. So it just says grab the bear off the list, create an image, start loading that image, and then once that has finished loading, call and grab the next ones here. So I'm just going to change this image source to bear.jpg, and then I'm going to push this image onto our images array up here, just so we have a list of the images when we're all done here. So now, let's say you've going through this list and you get to the end of the list. Well, shift is going to return undefined if it can't find anything in the list. So we can just simply say, if there is no bear, then all the bears are done. All bears are done. And we can list out our images here because we should have a full array. And then we'll just return there and cancel that out. And so now we have our function here. We can just call load bears, and we can kick it off the first run, and it will go through each one of our images and load them one after the next after the next. And when it's all done, it will give us this list of fully loaded images. So it's official. You are now a master of callbacks, and I hope this video has been very helpful for you. And if it has, then please share it, and hopefully it'll be helpful for somebody else. And if you want to see more videos, then please subscribe. Thanks again for watching.